At Dogfish Head, we rely on the goodness of Mother Nature to provide us with the beautiful and bountiful culinary ingredients used in both our off-center beverages and dishes at our restaurants. Mariah and I wanted to learn more in real time with the real people on the ground doing the work, addressing the environmental issues facing us globally, and on a localized level along Dogfish's backyard, the eastern seaboard. We reached out to our longtime partners at the Nature Conservancy for help, knowing their mission is centered around conserving the lands and waters on which all life depends. The very same lands and waters on which all the natural ingredients in the stuff we make comes from. So we decided to take a road trip from Miami to Maine to learn about the diverse and critical conservation efforts happening every day. We spoke to local environmental experts and explored Mother Nature's splendors. So buckle up and ride along on our Mother Nature Let's Do This road trip. All right, Mariah, you ready?
Let's do this.
Yeah. I am here today at Blowing Rocks Preserve with Chris.
I'm Kristen Krasko, and I'm the manager here at Blowing Rocks Preserve.
Yeah. And how did Blowing Rocks Preserve get its cool name?
Well, the name actually ties in with why this wonderful place was protected. So on our ocean shoreline, we have that beautiful rocky outcropping of Anastasia limestone, which when the ocean conditions are right, so when we have big swells and a nice high tide, when those waves crash up against the rocks, they really send the water shooting into the air, sometimes upwards of 50 feet. So the folks who live here on Jupiter Island, which is our local community here, they actually chose to protect this land. So we have 73 acres that were donated to the Nature Conservancy to make sure that that beautiful rocky outcropping, as well as the native habitats you see around us, could be protected forever.
And we had like an epic morning out. You brought us great luck. We saw just an amazing sunrise, and then you were cooing with excitement because it was unexpected. But what else did we get to see as we walked away from the sunrise moment?
We were very fortunate to see tracks from a mother leatherback who actually came up to lay her nest last night. So, you know, they are just such massive animals that it's very obvious. It's almost like a tractor drove up on the beach. So you can actually very clearly make out the tracks as she's coming up, the area where she stopped to potentially dig the nest, and then the tracks going back out to the ocean. So we have 3 different species of sea turtles that nest on our beach. So on our 1 mile stretch of shoreline, in a busy nesting year, we can have upwards of 1,000 sea turtle nests, which is pretty amazing.
And not only are you guys making sure that it's a pristine environment as much as possible to not disrupt nature's way there, but oftentimes you and collaborative entities that you work with actually, you know, gently interject yourselves into the process to make sure the population is as robust as possible.
Our staff do go out and patrol the beaches to make sure that no turtles become lodged in the rocks that we have, because even though they're beautiful, they present a little bit of a hazard. Being on a barrier island, it's very unique because it really can give you a picture from our beach habitat. We have native beach dune, coastal strand. As you get to the middle of the island, it's a beautiful maritime hammock forest. And then moving on to the lagoon shoreline, we see our mangrove swamp. And then under the water in the Indian River Lagoon, we have seagrasses. And mangroves and seagrasses are really critical nursery habitats. So really for the Nature Conservancy to be able to protect not just our mile of ocean shoreline, but also our mile of lagoon shoreline, again, just kind of helps feed into that whole cycle. You know, the planet and the ocean are not separate. They're not puzzle pieces that exist independently. The systems are all tied together. So it's really interesting to see a holistic view of all those systems here at Blowing Rocks.
And just off that body of water where the baby, you know, shrimps and crabs were getting bigger was also where the seagrass were, where you mentioned that's where the manatee play, right?
Yeah, the seagrasses are not just habitat, they are also food. So herbivores that people love to see, like manatees, even green sea turtles, we will see them in the Indian River Lagoon to come in and feed.
That's pretty cool. And Maritime Hammock's a really good beer name.
This project to date is still one of our largest living shoreline projects that we've installed. It's about 250 feet long. It's about 4 feet wide. It's made of 3 different kind of materials. And so the day that we installed this project, we had a little less than 200 people out here. We had full sheets of plywood lined out in the mud, passing materials down and setting everything up. And they did that in 2 hours.
Because you have to, because your tide's only allowing you to do it.
We normally have a 3-hour work window for volunteers.
Yeah.
And so starting in 2009, we did our first project, and that was in Cape Romaine National Wildlife Refuge. But we wanted to get in closer to more developed private property areas with the hope that our Department of Health would utilize our projects to help develop a living shoreline permit regulation for South Carolina. And so what that means is a property owner will have another tool in his toolbox. It should be as easy for a property owner to get a permit for a living shoreline as they do for a seawall.
So, living shoreline, give us a definition of that and examples of different models for that.
Sure. A very broad definition is if you can imagine a long-term, sustainable, healthy shoreline that does not erode and that is able to change as we see seas rising, and something that could resist some of your more routine storms, right? So that is what we think of as a living shoreline, something that keeps that land and water connection, something that absorbs the wave energy and promotes sediment, deposition, versus something that would be a bit harder, that would be a bit more reflective of energy.
Usually man-made, like seawalls, right?
Exactly. One of the mainstays we have that we talk about all the time with oysters, natural reefs and things like that, and built reefs, is the filtering capacity. So a single oyster can filter 50 gallons of water a day. A reef that we have that is 50 feet long, and there is enough oyster growth, we know, on that 50 feet reef in McClellanville to treat the same amount of water that goes through our local sewage system treatment plant every day.
Wow.
Not that we're trying to treat sewage with these oysters, but it gives you a concept of how much water, like even just a 50-foot reef, and this is larger than that. So we do look at the filtering capacity of the oysters. They are habitat forming. So they do support bait fish, which we're seeing the skimmers come and eat right now.
The skimmers are the birds.
The skimmer is this bird right behind us that keeps just coming
Cue
through.
the skimmers! Look at that!
Yeah.
How cool
So
is that?
they are providing habitat for bait fish, smaller fish. That's part of that really important food chain. And then that can also bring in bigger fish, which is they're commercially and recreationally important fish that are provided habitat and feeding grounds around these reefs.
Yeah. So you've put a lot of time into this 20 years, but it feels like now you guys are accelerating, you're collapsing time and gaining amazing momentum on these projects.
Yes, definitely.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
The Black River Preserve, it was kind of like a super highway of nature lovers on kayaks and canoes kind of all trying to get to one really special place in an absolute forest of special places. What did we get to see today?
What we saw today was an old grove of bald cypress. The oldest known tree is 2,632 years old. It's the oldest tree east of the Mississippi.
That we just saw?
That we just saw.
Oldest tree east of the Mississippi?
Yeah, and it just represents, if you think about a tree that's been around for over 2,600 years, it's amazing. And you get under these trees and they're not gigantic, but they are aged and they're weathered and they have a magnificent that I think you can only really feel when you get in there, when you get under them.
They're slight, but they're mighty,
yes.
You could say, right? And so what is it about this environment that allowed a tree to get that old?
Well, these trees grow in the Black River. It is known as a blackwater stream. It's a stream that has a pH that is more on the acidic side. It has a sandy bottom and low nutrients. And so all of those conditions, as well as the fluctuating water levels just from precipitation and storm events, all creates an environment that bald cypress is very well adapted to and other species aren't.
Over decades now, you guys have over 700,000 acres that you guys have influenced along this waterway?
Well, so 700,000 acres is actually what we've protected in the state of North Carolina.
Okay.
Much of that has been transferred to our state partners. Along this river, along the Black River, We've protected about 10,000 acres currently.
Yep.
17,000 acres is protected between the Nature Conservancy and partners. We're doing a lot of restoration along the banks of the river in the longleaf pine savannas, restoring longleaf pine, because in essence, a lot of the quality that you have in this river, the water quality, is because of intact forested uplands. And so we're taking areas and we're improving that habitat, and it's not only helping improve the conditions of the river, but it's also creating that habitat for those species up along the banks of the river that use these areas.
And when we were going through it, it was also kind of cool because it was kind of like, it was like nature bumper cars. There was the stalagmites coming out of the water that are parts of the cypress. Can you describe that?
Yeah, so when you go through these bald cypress swamps, you'll see the trees, and you get cypress knees that come up, and they're just these very sort of organic lumps, pyramids
like
that
Lord
come
of the
out,
Rings
right? And they're
worlds.
covered with moss, and they just start to come up. And we think part of the reason that bald cypress grow those knees is for stability, because of the shallow rooting. They're creating these support systems around them.
Can anyone come on to this, body of water and go visit this 2,600-year-old tree? Is that controlled in any way, or is anyone welcome to do that?
Nope, these are public waters. There are public boat launches on Wildlife Resource Commission land.
It's definitely worth it if you're watching this and you're allowed to, regulatory-wise, come visit. Hello, we are multitasking here in a gorgeous parking lot somewhere in North Carolina, getting ready to head out on the next chapter of our Mother Nature Let's Do This adventure. We had an awesome day today, didn't we, Mariah?
We did, a great day.
So we were at Black River Preserve here in North Carolina. Got to hang with a bunch of the folks that work at the Nature Conservancy here in North Carolina. And our guide, Deb, was absolutely amazing. And we got to see what?
We got to see a 2,600 plus year old tree, actually a grove of them in a cypress swamp, and kayak between them.
It was absolutely beautiful. And the one that we saw has been recorded to be the oldest cypress tree in eastern North America. I think outside of California, there's nothing bigger.
Nothing bigger or older.
I'm sorry, nothing older. And it's actually not that big. There are cypress trees that get over 100 feet tall. So it's slightly smaller than that, but it is a mighty, mighty tree. Bald cypress can live in wet conditions. They can live in dry conditions. They can live in swampy conditions. So they're pretty incredible. And so we chose to pair today's preserve experience with Slightly Mighty, best-selling low-cal beer in America. It is slight in calories and mighty in hop character, just like the mighty resilience of the bald cypress tree. What was your favorite moment of the day?
There's this little bright yellow bird that kind of followed us through the marsh or swamp as we kayaked. I like that.
I loved all the caterpillars. We were essentially covered in caterpillars.
They're dropping from the trees.
Like rain. It was super cool. So find some Slightly Mighty, get out and visit your local Nature Conservancy preserve. Cheers.
Cheers.
Your history into this awesome business that you guys are now growing is different than, say, most industrial, large-scale malting companies. You are actually a trained German brewer.
That's right. So I in some way we say I was trained the old-fashioned way. So when I started brewing and went to school for it, malting was still a lot of what the education was about.
So as we got closer to doing this trip, we wanted to really understand, the carbon impact of brewing. And, we got to walk before we run, and we wanted to just do one recipe where we really carefully on a small scale track that. And so we reached out to you to start working on, with our partners at Indigo, to start sourcing, regeneratively grown grains. And maybe talk about the process of you approaching farmers and asking them to go that route.
Obviously, you guys are thinking about this at Dogfish, and so approached us about it. But most of my other brewers, everybody has this on their mind, but it's really hard to figure out what to do and how to do it. And with indigo coming to the table and really suggesting a very tangible and easy to understand concept here, it made sense for us to jump in on this. And what happened is that I learned really quickly that talking to our farming partners, right, our farmers, was very easy and kind of a simple conversation, because
you mean talking about considering changing over their crops,
right,
to regeneratively
adjusting their practices and having a conversation about climate change and the impact it has on farming and the future of farming, and essentially our future as a malt house, right? We heavily depend on the crops coming out well and consistent going forward, and so are you as brewers. And they get it because they've been seeing this over the last decade change more and more quickly.
Examples of change.
Examples of change are, weather patterns, right? Too much rain at the wrong time in the winter. We get winter grains here in the south, right? So the grain stays in the ground from October all the way to May. So the weather has a lot of play over these many, many months. Insect pressures, because the winters are no longer as cold, so the frost can't play its part anymore in wiping out weevils and beetles and other things. So there's a lot that we manage with them, and explain to them that adding an additional crop or changing certain practices they do, like no-till or planting cover crops in between crop changes, and so additional activities sequester more CO2 into the ground while they're growing also the commercial crop, made sense to them. But for us, just buying offsets didn't make sense, even though it's probably equally valid to do this. But partnering with our farmers and really sort of have them help us change the world little by little, and having farming take care of itself, that's sort of how we think about it, right? We want to find our own solutions and help in that process, and so are they. And so it's an investment in their future and ours.
That's something worth celebrating, I would say. Well done.
So this farm has been in operation, continuous agriculture, since 1876. So we are the 6th generation now.
Wow, that's awesome. Is this the first time you've been interviewed with a guy with a fancy chair within the barn, or
very first time?
Do this all the time.
We've never welcomed brewing royalty here before, so this is the first time.
Please. And so, tell us about your journey, because you were both a beer lover, right? So tell us about your journey.
That's right. So I started in craft brewing, just home brewing, and started in Columbus, Ohio. My wife and I had a little apartment there, and I was, steaming up the place and making friends with neighbors for all the wrong reasons. Days. And so that's where I sparked my passion for beer. Yeah. And we moved back home, my wife here at the farm, and I wanted to be able to contribute to the family agricultural story with something tied to beer, which is something I'm passionate about. So I had 15 acres of barley in the ground, had no idea what to do with it, had no idea how to grow it, and just raised my hand, asked for help, and Dr. David Marshall from NC State connected me with Sebastian. He said, hey, there's this guy, he's in Durham, he's only about 20 miles away from you, he's German, he sounds very serious, and so why don't you give him a call and see if he could be a source for you to supply. And we connected. He was very early in the process, just getting started, just like me. And so we kind of have come up in the game together quite a bit here.
Yeah, that's awesome.
We started just with the basics, and then as we started this relationship and realized that this craft brewing market is so strong in North Carolina, we needed to treat it differently. It could become the cash crop for us over a period of time. Yeah. And so regenerative agriculture fits into that because it allows us to do more with less. So we can use less inputs, we can increase our soil health and have a better crop and a higher quality crop, and be more sustainable in the process for our customers.
So when you say regenerative farming practices, as you're now moving to be fully certified, utilizing those, right, for your brewer's barley, what does that mean to be certified regenerative?
So what that means is basically using best practices to restore soil health into the soil, subsurface, creating an environment for these plants to grow and thrive without the use of synthetic nitrogen, for example, or other things that might be less environmentally friendly or high in the carbon footprint. So these are the things that we try to do in order to really create a great crop, but also do it in a way that's sustainable and long-term, restores that soil health.
It's better for the crop itself, but it's also better for the environment.
That's the win-win. That's what it's all about. Is farmers can be profitable while also being responsible with the environment, and good stewards of the land. In collaboration with this thriving community in craft brewing, the cool thing is we're creating a local economy, right? So we have from the farm to the malt house to the brewer to the beer drinker, we've connected this gap that has really created a high value relationship throughout the value stream in the supply chain. And so we're not so worried about the price of barley in Canada, for example, or the weather on the high plains. Now we can really grow together and supply that need, that demand of the beer drinker here locally with responsibly grown grains right in your backyard.
Yeah, and the web of that community is from you, the farm, through the maltster, through the brewer, and through the customer that keeps their money local when they support that process too.
Exactly, and as long as we all get it and we all work together to create a really cool, good product, the customer, the consumer will appreciate that, and we'll all thrive and grow together. And that's the really neat thing about this is doing it together in partnership.
Hello!
Hi.
Another great day on the road.
Road trip keeps going.
It does. And today we're going to be talking about our awesome time at EPIPHANY Malting and at Perry Farms. Perry Farms, 6 generations of farming in one spot, right?
Cool.
But only recently did they embrace not just barley farming, but for brewing, but regenerative farming techniques. And so my favorite part of the day was listening, both to Sebastian talking about using and sourcing local grains from local farmers, and how I didn't expect it to be so diverse, like crazy heirloom rices and different kinds of barley and different kinds of rye and wheat, and then we got to go to one of his biggest suppliers who's on the journey to be certified full-on regenerative farming, and meet with Tim, who's not only a brewer, he started as a home brewer, but he was also a farmer, and just listening to the two of them talk with great passion about how they're building community locally, that line from the farm to the maltster to the brewer to the consumer, and that the consumer would be psyched to keep their money local. And it was cool because they were right outside of Raleigh, and they're saying, look, the city's moving this way, but if we can convince the beer drinkers in this city that they need farms really close to them, if that means they're getting local, super fresh beer, then hopefully we can make it to the future generations without having to be house farmers and keep this as a real farm. So that was my favorite moment of the day. How about you?
My favorite moment of the day was standing alongside of the field of barley growing and watching the wind. You could see the wind across the top of the barley, and it was kind of like you can see the wind across the top of the ocean, but this was a sea of green, and that was really cool to stand
A sea of green. And we had barley fields next to rye fields next to wheat fields. Those are their big 3 crops there. So
wheat.
yes,
That brings us to the pairing of the day.
Mariah's got the pairing of the day.
Preserve.
Okay, and this time the preserve was a farm.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
So we chose a non-alcoholic beer
Our newest istest.
that is actually made with wheat.
Yep.
When we were talking about wheat today, I was sort of starting to crave a lemon quest. So
Lemon Quest.
that's what it is. So
Cheers.
great day.
Yeah, it was another great day. So check out dogfish.com to learn more about the Mother Nature Let's Do This program and project and how you can get involved. Cheers.